The hull is closed, all the planks are on, but a closed hull isn't a finished hull. Before I can turn this boat right side up, every surface on the outside has to be fair, primed, and painted. And when that's done, I flip it. Alone by hand in the garage. With all planks installed, the hull still had a long way to go before paint could touch it. The first job was fairing, working the outside of the hull until every surface was smooth and continuous. No ridges, no hollows, no bumps from the plank seams or planing marks. A fairing board is a long, flexible sanding block, sometimes just a strip of thin plywood with sandpaper stuck to the bottom. You drag it across the hull surface in long strokes at different angles, and you watch the scratch pattern. Where the board rocks over a bump, that's a high spot. Where it skips across without cutting, that's a low spot. You fill the lows with fairing compound, thickened epoxy, and you sand down the highs. Then you check again. Then you do it again. It's slow. On a hull with many planks, the number of seams and joint edges that need attention adds up fast, but there's no shortcut. The paint will follow every contour you leave behind. If the surface isn't right before the first coat of primer, it won't be right after. The primer just makes it visible. After the hull surface was faired and the epoxy cured, the bow stem, the solid oak stem I had scarfed and fitted during planking, was epoxy glued and screwed to the backbone. It was shaped and trimmed to follow the keel line, and holes were drilled for the stem hook. Once the epoxy fill was applied and cured, the stem was faired smooth and ready for primer. Running the length of the keel is the keel band, a brass fitting that protects the keel's bottom edge. When a small boat is beached, trailered, or hauled, the keel takes the wear. The keel band is what stands between the wood and the ground. Fitting the keel band meant shaping the keel to match the band's profile exactly. I fitted the band, marked the contact line, and used a plane and rasp to shape the keel surface until the band seated correctly. Then the band was removed. It would go back on permanently after the hull was painted. You don't want brass against wood when paint is being applied. The band needed to be a clean, separate layer, seated on a finished surface. With the stem faired and the keel band fitted and set aside, the hull was ready for its first coat of primer. I put several coats of primer on the hull. After each coat cured, I sanded again. 220 grit, long strokes, checking for anything the primer had revealed. Primer doesn't hide imperfections, it finds them. Every hollow you missed in fairing shows up as a shadow under the primer. Every ridge you thought was faired catches the light and tells you it wasn't. That's actually useful. The primer stage is a second chance to fix things before the top coat locks them in. I did another round of filling and sanding between primer coats, and a final coat of primer before paint. Standing next to a primed hull after months of bare wood and epoxy was something. The shape was right. The shear line was there. For the first time, I could actually see the boat I'd been building. Not the frame, not the planks. The boat. After another week of sanding, I painted Alice Gale. I used an HVLP sprayer, a high-volume, low-pressure spray system that atomizes paint without the overspray of a standard gun. In an enclosed garage, a low overspray system matters. It worked to perfection, even in my inexperienced hands. For a first-time painter spraying a hull, that's exactly what you need, a forgiving tool. The paint was System 3 WR-LPU, a linear polyurethane that I thinned about 25% for spraying. I used less than half a gallon for the whole hull. My first coat went on too thick. I got runs, long, slow drips down the hull surface that cured into ridges. I stopped, let it cure, sanded it back, and started over. The second attempt came out right. The paint flowed level, the coverage was good, and the surface set up with the satin sheen I wanted. Not a showroom finish, something that looked like a working boat that was built with care and would be sailed. With the top coat on, the keel band went back on permanently. The photos from this point show the finished hull in detail. The forward view of the keel band, the sheer straight line from bow to stern, the transom, the strake details close up. It's the hull document, a record of what the outside of the boat looked like, I did not follow the design in this area. I wanted a solidly mounted hook at the stem and keel, which is why the stainless U-bolt went in rather than the rope loop the plan specified. The finished hull carries that decision. It looked clean, flush, and permanent. The rudder work was also happening in this period. It would go on at a later stage, but the rudder itself was being shaped and fitted while the hull was in its final stages. The hull had been upside down on the building frame since turnover day. The first flip nearly a year earlier. Everything built since then had been done with the boat inverted. The planking, the fairing, the stem, the paint, all of it with the hull overhead and the keel in the air. Now it needed to come right side up. I drilled a bolt hole through the transom in a location that would later be covered by the rudder pintle, a hardware mounting point that would hide the hole completely. An eye bolt went in there. At the bow, the stainless U-bolt I'd already installed served as the second lifting point. The method was the same as the first flip. Block and tackle hoists running up to the garage rafters. What was different this time was how I attached to the boat. The first time, the hull was a bare frame with no hardware of its own. I couldn't drill into it and didn't want to. So I'd built a custom extension clamp system out of 2x4s and 10-inch bolts, clamped around the outside of the frame to create lift points I could hook the hoist to. It worked, but it was a production. This flip, the lift points were already on the boat. The stainless U-bolt at the bow had been installed as part of the build. The temporary eye bolt at the transom went in specifically for this job through a hole that would later be hidden by the rudder pintle. Hook the hoist to the hardware, run a few ropes to control the rotation, and the hull turned. I did it alone. That was a personal decision. I wanted to do the mechanical work myself. The hull was remarkably well balanced on those 2 points. The turn was smooth. Almost. The lifting clamps shifted around the eye bolts as the hull rotated, and in 2 spots they scraped the paint. Minor repairs, a bit of sanding, and a touch-up coat. A reminder that you protect the finish right to the end. I turned the boat over. The hull was right side up. Then I removed the cross-spalls, the temporary bracing pieces that had held the hull's width consistent during the entire build. With the spalls out, the interior was fully open for the first time. What had been a building frame for over a year was now a hull cavity waiting to be fitted out. I should mention, the outside looked great. The inside did not. Months of planking work, gluing, clamping, screwing, dripping had left the interior in rough shape. I'd cleaned up after each plank as I went. It wasn't enough. There was still plenty of dried epoxy, sawdust, and scrap to deal with before fit-out could begin. The beautiful painted hull and the messy interior. That's the honest picture. One more note for anyone building their own boat. I had finished the bulkheads to a nearly final state before planking. That felt like progress at the time. Once the hull was planked and flipped, I saw why that was the wrong call. There was significant additional work to do on the interior anyway. Stop the bulkhead finishing earlier, leave yourself room, you'll need it. Painted hull, right side up. The outside is done. Now every hour goes into the inside. The buoyancy tanks, the decking, the gunnels. The interior is where the boat becomes a place you can actually sit in and sail. Next comes the inside.